Over mankind's short time on this earth, war has evolved from chaotic bloodshed to a hard science. It is based on deliberate chemical reactions, controlling machines, and creating devastation. We have become so comfortable with our control over such a science that we forget that the weapons we wield are mere seconds from disaster at any given moment. In today's episode, we are going to examine a tragic case of what happens when we lose control of our own weapons. This is the story of the deadly 1967 USS Forrestal fire, which occurred during the tempo of combat operations in the Vietnam War. But first, I'd like to thank Private Internet Access for sponsoring today's episode. Throughout history, wars have been won or lost based on the ability to keep sensitive data a secret, and out of the hands of those who would use that private information to their own ends. Espionage is the name of the game, and countering those who would take your private data is something we should be taking more seriously. After all, we can't all work at Bletchley Park, but we can all use today's sponsor to keep our information secure. Private Internet Access is the world's most transparent VPN provider. Their code is public, so you can take a look for yourself and see how it all works. Their token-based dedicated IPs hide your IP address and allow you to navigate anywhere online, and ensure no one can invade your private digital life, not even government censors. PIA also has servers in more than 83 countries and in each of the US states. Not to stretch the war metaphor too far, but Private Internet Access's VPN software will let you shoot down those ads, trackers, and malicious websites, like the RAF fighter pilots shooting down Nazis at the Battle of Britain, with an even better success rate, as their software blocks every single piece of malicious software that would steal your data. So use the link in the description box below to be better protected than Fort Knox by signing up to Private Internet Access. By using the link in our description, you get an exclusive 83% discount, which works out at $2.03 a month, with an extra 4 months free. Lock down your data with Private Internet Access. Make sure you're not leaking information to the enemy. Welcome to Wars of the World. During World War II, it became clear to all concerned that after decades of building bigger and more powerful battleships, the aircraft carrier had now replaced them as the key component of any fleet. The aircraft carrier had the power and versatility to carry out almost any naval task demanded of it, and project power far beyond its home nation's shores. Unfortunately, an aircraft carrier is only as good as the aircraft on its deck, and in the post-war period, the US Navy found itself with a problem. In order to stay relevant and receive funding from Washington, it had to be able to operate newer and larger jet-powered aircraft, and eventually adopt a nuclear strike role like their biggest rival, the US Air Force. The war had gifted the US Navy with a vast fleet of carriers, but most of them could only barely handle the first-generation jet aircraft, while only a few could be converted to handle the larger jets that were then in development. Thus, in 1951, the Navy secured funding for a new carrier, a super carrier. Displacing over 81,000 tons when fully loaded, the new carrier would replace the Imperial Japanese Navy's Shinano as the largest aircraft carrier ever built, and promised to be able to handle any of the new aircraft predicted to appear in the coming decades. Representing the revolution in carrier operations the ship offered, it was decided to name the vessel in honor of the United States' first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. This led to the ship receiving the nickname FID for First in Defense, and this later morphed into the ship's official motto, with the letters standing for fidelity, integrity, dignity. Commissioned into the fleet on October 1st, 1955, Forrestal incorporated all the lessons learned from almost 50 years of carrier operations by that time. It was the first US Navy ship to feature an angled flight deck from conception rather than having one fitted later, making carrier landings significantly safer, eliminating the fear of crashing into parked aircraft at the front of the carrier, as had been the case on the previous straight-decked vessels. Additionally, the ship was also designed with a mirrored landing system to assist pilots making their approach to the carrier, helping them keep on the correct path to the deck. Again, significantly improving safety during landings, while steam catapults were incorporated to aid the newer, heavier jet's takeoff with a useful load of weapons and fuel. Forrestal therefore was at the cutting edge of naval technology in the late 1950s, and in the growing tension with the Soviet Union as the Cold War entered its second decade, the ship undertook several cruises across the world in order to demonstrate the modern US Navy's military might. Forrestal's power only increased with the addition of even more powerful warplanes in the early 1960s, such as the brutish McDonnell Douglas F-4B Phantom II. Truly demonstrating the versatility of the carrier, the US Navy also trialed landing a Lockheed C-130 Hercules on its deck, these trials being all the more spectacular with the fact that the transporter had no tailhook to catch the arrestor wires which normally stopped a carrier plane. Of course, all this capability was not for show. It was to exert US military influence on the world stage and help contain the spread of communism. To that end, in 1964, Forrestal was dispatched to support a military coup in Brazil under Operation Brother Sam. The goal was to oust the Brazilian president from power, who the US feared was leading his country on the path to becoming another Cuba, and replace him with a pro-US military dictatorship. The operation succeeded without Forrestal launching a single aircraft, the carrier and its escorts officially being off the coast of South America as part of a training exercise. Then, in 1967, it was announced that the carrier was to set sail from its base in Norfolk, Virginia, and head for the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of Vietnam. On board was 30-year-old naval aviator Lieutenant Commander John McCain, who was assigned to fly A-4E Skyhawks, and who, along with his fellow aviators, would be participating in Operation Rolling Thunder, the sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam. Arriving on station, the carrier's air wing began operations in earnest, and soon the frantic nature of combat carrier operations was felt by all on board. The dangers of an accident occurring during this hectic period were at the forefront of everyone's minds in 1967, as just the year before, on October 26, 1966, the carrier USS Orskany suffered an appalling fire whilst on combat operations when a sailor accidentally ignited a magnesium flare. Panicking, he threw the flare back in its locker rather than over the side, and this in turn ignited more of the flares. The resulting fire killed 44 sailors and forced the ship to return to the US for repairs. The morning of July 29, 1967 began, like the previous 4 days, with a high tempo of operations on the deck. It was the 5th day of an intense series of strikes against North Vietnam, and the second taking place that morning when Lieutenant Commander McCain was strapped into his A-4E as it was parked on the port side of the aft deck of the carrier. Beside him was fellow A-4 pilot Lieutenant Commander Fred D. White, while parked opposite on the deck behind the carrier's island structure were 7 F-4Bs and 2 North American RA-5C Vigilante reconnaissance aircraft. Strapping into the aftmost F-4B was Pilot Lieutenant Commander James E. Bangert and his weapons officer Lieutenant Junior Grade Lawrence E. McKay from Fighter Squadron 11. The nose of their Phantom was pointing in the direction of McCain and White's Skyhawks at approximately 10:51 hours when they disengaged the aircraft from the ship's electrical power to their onboard power. At that moment, a power surge occurred, which traveled through the aircraft's systems, causing one of the Phantom's armaments, a 5-inch Mark 32 Zuni rocket, to fire. The rocket raced across the flight deck, catching an unfortunate sailor as it went and tearing off his arm, before hitting one of the parked Skyhawks opposite. The official report indicated that the weapon hit White's Skyhawk. However, in his biography, John McCain claimed it was his aircraft that was hit. Regardless, the result was the same, as the Zuni tore off one of the Skyhawk's bulbous external fuel tanks loaded with JP-5 aviation fuel, causing it to spill across the deck. The safety mechanism on the Zuni meant that it failed to detonate on impact. However, its rocket motor ignited the fuel, creating a fireball that tumbled across the deck and began to consume the parked, fully fueled and bombed up Skyhawks. Strapped into his Skyhawk, McCain saw the fireball rolling out across the deck, leaving a wall of flame behind it. Realizing his mission that morning was over before it had even begun, he immediately powered down his A4E's Pratt & Whitney J52 engine and began to unstrap himself before opening the canopy and clambering out of the cockpit before the fire could consume his aircraft. Stepping onto the refueling probe that ran alongside the forward fuselage and protruded several feet ahead of the nose, he walked along it as far forward as he could before leaping 10 feet onto the deck in an effort to escape the burning fuel. Unfortunately, the flames caught his flight suit as he landed, and he furiously began patting them out. His first thought was to run to safety while the ship's firefighting teams sprung into action. But then he saw a fellow pilot stumbling away from the flames, having been clearly injured, so he went to help him first, before they fled to the carrier's island. Other A4 pilots were also scrambling to escape the flames before their aircraft were consumed by them. Lieutenant Junior Grade Dom Daneworth also leapt from his Skyhawk and injured his knee as he attempted to flee, causing him to hobble away. Lieutenant Junior Grade Whip Wilson also managed to escape his aircraft before telling the firefighting teams it was neither chocked or strapped to the deck, and was only being held in place by its brakes, meaning there was a very real danger of the aircraft rolling away, either over the side or towards the Phantoms parked opposite. However, not all the Skyhawk pilots were so lucky. Lieutenant David Dolarhyde recalled later that after he escaped the fire, he turned and saw the horrific sight of a pilot trapped in his cockpit as the flames engulfed the aircraft. Very quickly, alarms started blaring throughout the ship, proclaiming a fire on the flight deck. But such is the confined world of life below deck aboard a carrier, many sailors thought it was a drill and were perplexed as to why one was taking place during the planned launch of an airstrike. It was only as they reached the flight deck that they realized it was genuine and couldn't believe the carnage they were seeing. As the fire teams fought to control the flames, orders were given from the carrier's air boss, Commander David B. Lember, to move the undamaged aircraft as far forward as possible in order to spare them from the fire. As foam and water were sprayed onto the fire, ordnance specialists knew that it was now a race against time to put the fires out before the bombs loaded under the burning Skyhawks detonated from the flames. To the best of their knowledge, it would take approximately 10 minutes for their casings to melt and the flames to reach the explosive core. As Chief, Gerald W. Farrier took command of Damage Control Team 8 and donned his protective clothing, he observed a 1,000-pound bomb drop from a burning Skyhawk and land square in a pool of burning aviation fuel, and so they immediately began spraying it with Purple K, a fire-suppressing chemical, but it was in vain. 1 minute and 36 seconds after the rocket had struck the parked aircraft, the bomb's casing cracked, allowing the fire to reach the explosives, which soon detonated. 35 men, including Farrier, were killed in the blast, while 27 more were injured as the aft deck of the Forrestal became a burning hell on the water. The bomb's detonation destroyed what was left of White and McCain's aircraft and blew a hole in the deck, causing the fire to seep into the hangar below, where dozens more aircraft were parked. The detonation signaled the start of a series of bombs cooking off under the heat and flames, with the firefighting teams almost helpless to stop them. Within 5 minutes, 9 more bombs, most of which were 1,000-pounders, exploded in quick succession, destroying the Skyhawks and the Phantoms opposite. The detonations tore more gaping holes in the flight deck, while one bomb killed at least 50 sailors who had been sleeping in their bunks when the alarm sounded, having finished night duty. Fearing more detonations, orders were given that as much ordnance that was on deck be removed and hurled into the sea as quickly as possible. Bombs, rockets, and guided missiles were removed from their aircraft and thrown overboard. In some cases, bombs were actually rolled off the deck. With so much JP-5 fueling the fires, it would take nearly an hour to bring the fire on the flight deck under control, and a further 30 minutes to extinguish it. However, below deck, various smaller fires continued to burn, and it would be almost a full day before the last one was located and put out. With the fire out, the crew of the Forrestal could begin to assess the damage. 20 planes had been destroyed, and the flight deck was rendered unusable. Worse still, 134 sailors and airmen had been killed, and scores more wounded or badly burned, making it the worst loss of life aboard a carrier since World War II. The ship limped its way to Subic Bay in the Philippines for temporary repairs before sailing back home to Norfolk, Virginia. Despite returning to service the following year, the Forrestal never again went to Vietnam. A board of investigation determined that the reason the Zuni rocket fired unintentionally was due to a safety pin designed to prevent such an accidental launch breaking free, either due to high winds or during the activity of preparing aircraft for combat. They also identified 2 other electrical faults in the rocket's launcher and the pylon under the Phantom that contributed to the incident. Incredibly, over a year and a half later, another Zuni rocket inflicted heavy damage on another US supercarrier, this time the nuclear-powered USS Enterprise. On January 14, 1969, while sailing off Hawaii, the Enterprise was preparing to launch aircraft armed with live Zuni rockets when an exhaust from an MD-3A Huffer unit, a tractor mobile heating unit used to warm up jet engines, ignited a Zuni rocket under the wing of an F-4 Phantom II. The resulting blast and fire ignited 3 more Zunis before a 500-pound bomb detonated, a situation that eerily mirrored the Forrestal fire, and along with the Oriskany fire in 1966, raised serious questions about the Navy's safety record and procedures. Unfortunately for the Forrestal, the 1967 fire was not the last time fire would grip the ship. On April 8, 1978, a fire broke out in the carrier's machine room when steam had apparently ignited the surrounding insulation, but in this case, the crew were quick to extinguish the flames and limit damage. Yet, incredibly, on April 11th, yet another fire emerged, this time at one of her steam catapults, and this was joined by a second fire located in a storeroom. Again, the crew responded professionally and had the fires under control with minimal damage in time. But another fire caused $2.5 million in damage in 1989, and all these incidents all led to the carrier being given unflattering nicknames of the USS Forest Fire or USS Zippo, the latter in reference to the popular brand of cigarette lighter. These incidents aside, Forrestal would go on to have a successful globe-trotting career, although it narrowly missed out on participating in Operation Desert Storm in 1991, before being decommissioned on September 11, 1993. There were efforts to turn the ship into a museum, but these came to nothing, and the vessel was scrapped in 2015. As for Lieutenant Commander John McCain, he voluntarily transferred to the USS Oriskany rather than return home with the Forrestal, and continued combat operations. Just 3 months after the fire, his Skyhawk was shot down and he was taken prisoner by the North Vietnamese. It would be 5 years before he was released, and afterwards he had a successful career in American politics, only narrowly missing out on becoming President of the United States in 2008. And there you have the tragedy of the USS Forrestal fire. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.